Is life what happens to us when we're making other plans? Or are we trying to bring the future to the present so we can do something about it now? That's what this section is all about, preparing for your final piece. Hey everyone, welcome to section 2. This is unit 1. Today we're actually looking at storyboards. What are they? How are they used? Why do we use them? Now, one thing I want to address before we get started. We do have two options. Your options for graphic arts in this course is a standalone piece, meaning a painting, some sort of art piece that will stand alone on its own but tells a story. I have examples today to show you of that if you're a little confused, but don't worry. Our second option is a sequential piece. Now, sequential meaning images, one after another in a certain order, that tell a story. You can use words. Application of words or text on that is something we'll cover down the way, but that's an option too. So sequential and standalone pieces. But storyboards in general are often used for sequential art pieces. Images together tells a story, a book. You could think also of storyboards being used in gaming, so to design video games or film, a lot in children's books, and a ton in comics and graphic novels. Storyboards are essential. It's almost like your blueprint to help you plan. When you actually start working on your finished piece, your polished final project, whatever that is that you're working towards in this course, your storyboard and your story together will help guide you. That's your blueprints, okay? So we're going to get started, and we're going to look at storyboards in general and how they apply to both standalone pieces of art and sequential art pieces. Let's get started. Okay, everyone, so storyboards, what are they? Why do we use them? Why are they important? With a story. Now, we're trying to tell a story, something narratively. A narrative story, something that is usually digested through words. We're trying to show that through an image or a series of images. In order to do that, we need to consider what a storyboard is and how it works. Now, typically, a storyboard is rough sketches. So if I were laying out a storyboard for a sequential piece, I would go ahead, have my story next to me, and I would start drawing out what that image would be inside of each one of my panels. Panels are the boxes that fall inside of graphic novels and comics and so forth. Now, if I was planning a storyboard for, let's say, a children's book, it would work similar, except for when I would sketch out my thumbnail, which is the small image that makes up what this portion of the page is, I would go ahead and sketch the entire page using just very simple lines and shapes to show composition, to show how each element relates to another element in the piece. Composition is the makeup of elements on the page. So if this was two people, let's say, having dinner together, and that was one page of my book, this was what my storyboard would look like. In the storyboard, I'm able to tell a few things. I'm able to see perspective, so at which angle we're looking at these characters from. I'm able to tell composition, as we said, so that means that we have where the placement of items are, such as your cups, such as your people, even. So all of these things together make up the actual storyboard. So in order to really understand how this works in a more complex way, I want to show you an example of the current storyboard that I have. Now, this is from a graphic novel that I did called Mockingbirds. It was written by Bruce Parsons. This is a finished page of this story. So when you look at this page here, you can see that it's completely finished. The inks are on there. All the elements are finished. The speech bubbles are prepared. This shows us the entire page. Now, before this ever happens or occurs, we start out with this, which is just a blank page. And in this, we see that there are words, and the words tell us what's happening. This is the story. You should have by this time finished your story or idea for your standalone piece. If you haven't, then you really need to get started on that. That's important. Now, with this story, what I do is I go ahead and I create thumbnails of what's happening. This is the finished page here, that not the finished page, but the page that I'll finish this on. So after I create the storyboard, I start working on the final piece here. So the elements that I need to do that, though, are my story and then the storyboard. These together help to produce the final piece, what's happening at the very end. Now, for standalone pieces, what I'm meaning by that is, let's say, a painting or just a general piece of art that stands alone on itself. It's not. There's not a lot of. There's no pages. There's no sequential format to it. There's not multiple drawings. There's not pages to it. So we're talking about one painting or one drawing, or however it may be. For those, it works a little different. Okay. And next, in the next part of this section and going into the next section, we're going to be talking about things like underpainting, laying color on layers to show value, color theory, composition, reflection, transparency, transfer images, texture, illusion of texture. All these things will be covered. So right now we're just talking about getting our idea from paper to an image. That's it right now. Okay. Now, before I show you an example of storyboarding for a painting or a final piece, I'm actually going to show you a couple of artists whose work that I admire. Remember, I asked you earlier in this course to select artists that you admire. Well, these are a few that I really just love. First, we'll start out with, this is more graphic design oriented, but this will tell you a little bit more about what we're trying to capture in our course here. This is Charlotte Trounce. She's an artist that has done a lot of work dealing with story, narrative, but within one final standalone piece. And as you can see, this does tell a story. There's no words, but there's no pages, and there's no multiple series of images, standalone images, such as inside of a panel or something like that. All of these elements are together. You could tell a story from this. You could probably interpret this in different ways, which is always good too. This is a great example here of from Craig Fraser. This is a cover of a magazine, but you can see within this graphic that there's something going on. You can pull a narrative from this. The person has cut out those clouds that you see out of paper, and then they're standing and admiring them. But if you hadn't seen the scissors and the papers laying around them, you may say this is just someone admiring a view. This is actually Craig Fraser as well, but if you look, there's steps going up the water hose, leading from the water spigot, and this really doesn't tell much of a narrative, but it is an interpretive piece. You can pull a lot from what's happening and why it's happening. That's especially important. Now, if you look close in this image here by Ed Brown, you're going to see a lot happening. This is from Jason and the Argonauts. So if you look close, there's images within images. So standalone pieces, this is really a prime example of showing narrative in a standalone piece. There are elements all around the main focus of the lady in the center of the picture. If you look close, there's images that are within each of the elements surrounding her that tell a little bit of the story. Now we're moving more into fine art, but we're talking about narrative, and I think this is something that really helps. This is Frederick Remington. This is a very famous painting of his buying polo ponies in the West is the title. But this shows narrative. There's men standing looking at a horse. There's one that seems to be a rider, and the other two, one maybe be the rancher. But you could tell that they're discussing something about this horse. what it is, we could all interpret differently. Um, Now we're moving back towards graphic design more. This is Ed Brown as well. You can see a lot of elements in this. There's things happening that you can interpret. There's a narrative going on. Like I said, though, many times standalone pieces do not force a narrative on you. They allow the viewer to interpret from it, which is all art, really. But that's an important thing with standalone pieces. Standalone pieces can be whimsical. They don't have to give a you don't have to put on there an exact statement that you just want to force on people to understand. That's an option, sure, but you can also do whimsical things that tell stories, shares ideas, concepts, those sorts of things. Storyboards help us to plan for this, though. Storyboarding helps us to design these elements. Now look at this piece here. This is from Patrick O'Leary. All right, there's a narrative for sure. Um, you have two what we might think of yetis or snow people. I'm not sure, but they're pulling fish out, and you can see that they're sprinkling salt now on an igloo. And we all know what salt does to snow and ice. So perhaps they're changing their diet from fish to people. I don't know exactly what's going to happen here, but there's a narrative. This is Robert Frank Hunter. There's a lot of different shapes going on and colors. You can play around with your not only your composition but color theory. You can play around with reflection and transparency in your painting to give a certain additive to the narrative you're trying to say. Now, this is a girl lost, you could say, in a jungle. Now, that doesn't look like any jungle I've ever seen in person. The colors don't really match up to what I've seen, maybe the one leaf there, the greens. But all those other colors this artist has chosen to put in here to add a different feeling that you'll get when you look at this. It's strange, it's foreign, and maybe dangerous. This comes from Rosie Blake. So you can see that a woman is looking out into this maybe a park. I was going to say a children's park, but I thought for a second dog park. But it's a park. And she's standing there looking at what she sees as mothers. Maybe there's one pregnant with two dogs. There's another holding a child's hand. One has a child on her back pointing at the ducks. What I get from this is maybe she really wants a child. This is something more detailed. This is from Tomer Hyanka. This is from a series of sequential pieces. This tells a lot. You can see that these folks all dress the same and have weapons, and they're looking at a beast, and they look to be pretty desperate. So I can, my own interpretation is something's about to happen. But you can see there's someone standing by the waterfall too, so maybe there's something going on we don't understand. So it makes you want to know more about this. Now, this is an interesting piece by John Berkey. A lot of people don't know who John Berkey is, but if you know, there's one very iconic image. I'll go back to this for a second. There's one iconic image I'll show in a second from him. I think I included it. But this tells a lot of narrative. Standalone piece of art, but, look, it's war. It's war from the perspective of a fighter pilot. This is I forgot this artist's name, but this is winter in Japan, and you can see a lot of folks are needing water still. This is, forgot this artist's name too, forgive me. But this person's leaving home, they're waving at their family, a suitcase. All right. This is an iconic piece from Bellows. This is a very famous painting, a series of paintings of boxing. The narrative here is fighting. You can see the referee trying to break them up. It's Bertha Loom. That's the name of this artist that does the Japanese influence work. Here we have a hard rain, but they're trying to keep their lanterns from being watered out. This is another one from, I forget his name again, but look at the person on the sidewalk and the people walking by. It gives an element of isolation, of being by yourself, being alone, being separated from the crowd. George Bellows is the name of This is another George Bellows piece. Family sitting in the living room. They got the pet parrot in the background. The narrative here could be interpreted a lot of different ways. There's a painting in the background. Maybe that's a daughter they lost. Who knows? But this is a one from Kong, the train, Berkey piece. And we have some iconic pieces here. Probably no one is best at narrative and standalone pieces than Norman Rockwell. Norman Rockwell's work has been used in tons and tons of different types of magazines, and because his work is very, very interpretive. You can tell a lot from one of his paintings. This, we have a boy who's run away from home. Look down and you see the stick with the bag tied to it. It's all his possessions. He's leaving, but he's talking to a policeman who's probably trying to convince him he needs to go back. This is Sir Lawrence Alma Tradema. Another fine art piece, but interpretive narrative nonetheless. Aha, so we had the Star Wars cover. This is Berkey. So I told you may have seen his work. He was hired to do the Star Wars series paintings for the posters, the first movies, and I think 1978 was the release of the first Star Wars movie. Maybe 1979, maybe 80, I'm not sure. But this is one of the the standalone paintings from that. Tell a lot from this. And then, of course, we have Degas. This is the dance class. Paintings, maybe at the beginning of this course you thought, how in the world do we do a painting that tells a story? Well, how in the world can you not tell a story from something like this? So those are just a few examples of some of the artists that have done standalone pieces that tell a lot. So how do you plan storyboards with a standalone piece? It's a lot different, but it's similar. You're going to have to need planning. I asked you to keep a sketchbook for a reason. In that sketchbook, you jot ideas down. Now, let's say these ideas were nicely typed up. Of course, this isn't ideas for a specific standalone piece, but just use for example. Pretend these are all my ideas. I have an idea for a standalone piece of art. I would interpret what I was drawing and start to design those elements. The first thing you have to decide is what shape is my art surface, canvas, whatever it is you're going to use. What's the shape of this? Is it more tall than it is wide? This has to be decided first. Is it going to be very square? Is it going to be very long? Very thin going up? So let's say I decide to create a piece like this. So I'm interpreting all these elements that I have over here that I've written down. Okay, and then I start to design composition. So a standalone storyboard for a standalone piece works similar to all the storyboard examples I gave you earlier, except you're only doing one. But inside of this one, you have to make it count. So you start to play around with the surface. You start to play around with perspective. You start to add things in here that you want to see in your piece, okay? And you start to design it the way that you would like to see it. You may play around with different things on your composition. That's the goal of this. It's for you to try different types of perspectives, try different types of composition, to see how you like how it all comes out, and see how you like or how you prefer to see whatever it is you're trying to achieve done visually. You may have to change these things around. You have to move the house way back here in the distance and the person way up close, literally right here against the forefront of the canvas near the viewer, and play around with perspective and composition. This is important. This is all important for your final piece. Let's look at a couple more examples today of storyboarding. And it's really hard for me to pull examples offline. I'd rather just show you examples that I've worked on. And I have an example here that I use from Peggy Goodman's book called Kentucky Family Reunion. And what happens with this is I start out with her manuscript, the story. That's it. I have to read it. I read her story, and I interpret what she has to say with the illustrations. Now, luckily, this author has provided some guidance for me. What you see in red is suggestions on what she would like to see on that specific illustration. I read that and I take that into consideration. Then what I would do is I would go and I do a sketch, a rough sketch of a layout of composition for that page. Now, I will send this to the author or the publisher, and they'll look at that and they say, I like this, can you move this, so on and so forth. But planning is key for this. After I figured out the composition for a page, I want to work on the characters. I want to know what they look like. So I'll draw a few out. I'll sketch a few of the characters out to see. Sometimes the author will want to look at these and approve, sometimes not. But once I have all the elements that I think that I need, I go ahead and I sketch a really rough, it's a little more detailed than a pencil, like stick people, but I do a drawing of the page. So I'll sketch it out. So I know the composition, I know the perspective. And once from there, I'll pencil the final piece. And once I go and pencil the final piece, I'm able then to start work on the actual watercolor portion. So here's the drawing that I just shared with you, finished. So all those elements that I needed to work with, I have already figured out before I ever start actually producing the art. I know what's going to happen. Planning is key for everything with this course. So a couple more examples of that. Here's a penciled page. These are actually 2 pages of a book. So when you look at this, it looks very long. These are actually going to be 2 pages, what we call a double spread in the industry. So I pencil this out. She may look at it. I know the composition. Now, before I ever did this, I had a really, really basic drawing where there's just stick fit people. But once the author looks at this, they approve or they may want to change something. We go ahead and work on the finished piece. You can see here. Now, your goal is to do the same, whether it's a sequential art piece or a standalone piece. Your goal is to plan this much. The course is about planning. Everything in this course is built for you to plan ahead. And one more example. This one I don't necessarily have a storyboard to show with it, but this is an example of a finished page. I did not sit down and just start drawing this. Every bit of this came from planning. All right, so let's move on and take into consideration a couple more examples. This is from the Hillbilly Bigfoot Survival Guide. This is actually one of my stories. So first, as I've asked all of you to do, I've written my story out. There's multiple pages to this story. And after I have all the pages, the entire story written out or typed out, I start to go in and start planning. When I start to work on the planning process of this, it looks a lot similar to what I've shown you earlier. These are storyboard pages. And notice on this page what's happened. At the bottom, I sketched out in pencil this particular panel from this page, but I didn't like it. So down below here, I redesigned it and made a note to myself to move that up and change that out. Storyboarding is essential for planning, knowing exactly where and what you're going to do on a page. This particular page here, I'll try to show you the finished piece from one of these. There's some more storyboard examples. But every page has to be designed. It has to be built up from the bottom, and the elements have to be decided upon before you start. But then, after you have all these elements, it's so easy then to go in and work on a finished page. This is a finished page from the Hillbilly Bigfoot Paranormal Survival Guide. It's a long title. But none of this could ever be achieved without knowing my storyboard and working through a storyboard, whether it's a standalone piece or a sequential piece. Now, this book has many pages to it. I've been working on this book for a while now. So as you can see, there's tons of pages here. So I can show you tons of examples from this. But I guarantee you none of these pages started out with just me drawing on a piece of paper. Planning is everything with this, and it's key. If you plan ahead, you can achieve a lot of different things that you couldn't couldn't have before. So storyboarding is important. We've pretty much finalized and can agree upon that. So in this course, you really need to use the element of a storyboard. But there's still a lot of questions, I'm sure, with standalone pieces of art. So for Canvas, like this one, storyboarding and planning for this may seem overwhelming, but it's not. It's more about preparation. Where are the elements going to go? How are you going to use this particular space that you've chosen to say what you want to say or convey what it is you want others to think about or consider? That's the main goal of this course, thinking about things differently. So we'll move on now to examples of standalone pieces and digital pieces. These are two of the elements within the course that are a little bit kind of left behind sometimes, which I don't want them to be, but the main purpose of getting a story out, it's a lot easier with word balloons or captions or words on a page like a children's book. But trying to do that digitally through a graphic art piece or through a standalone piece like a painting can be a little challenging. So let's take a look at that for a second and see what we can really pull as tools that we can use to create our final piece. So a canvas, we can choose whatever size we want. Canvas can be stretched, or you can buy prefabricated canvas. It's a pretty thick one. If you were to be able to see on the side of this, it's sort of thick. This is about 1.5 inches thick. So you don't really, there's no specifications on what size you need or anything. This is up to you too, just like the planning of your book or your sequential art piece, I should say, or your standalone piece. It's up to you. And let's take a couple examples out of from what I've done. It's easier for me to show you pieces that I've done than it is to pull up pieces from the internet. So we'll go back to mockingbirds for a second, and let's just take a look first at this. This is a example that Bruce Parsons sent me when he said, "This is what I think I'd like for the first issue of our book." So my job was to take what he sent me, this image, and turn that into an image of art that we could use. So we certainly couldn't use this picture. We didn't take it. It doesn't belong to us. There would be a copyright infringement, and that's not good. But what I can do is do an artistic representation of this particular picture, and we're fine. All right, so the first step in this, of course, is to start sketching out what it is I want to create. So I sketched out this, and I sent it to Bruce, and he said, "I like that." And from here, though, we need to then put that on canvas. Now, this is a narrative piece, doesn't work as much. This is a picture of a chicken, right, of a rooster. Now, this doesn't tell a lot in terms of story, but what I'm talking about is planning first. A lot of people might have stopped right here at this. So I'm done. This looks great. I don't personally think it does, but I'm just speaking hypothetically. Person might stop here. Why go ahead and create something else when I've spent a lot of time working on this one? Well, it's planning. These are a lot of times called dummies or studies. A study in art is when an artist will create something that they want the final piece to look like, and they'll put a lot of work into it. They'll put so much work into it that some artists might say, "Okay, that's good, leave it there." But they only do that so that they can see what the elements are and how they relate. So I knew I wanted an entirely black background, and I wanted to change the look of the rooster more, to make it more light. I wanted the colors to kind of blend into one another. So this was what ended up being the final piece here. I put this red line going up the center to kind of show an element of danger, of an element of mystery. So that was my idea. So what happened at the end is that this final image was incorporated into this, and we had our book cover. So planning is key. Standalone pieces of art, doesn't matter if it's sequential art, planning a comic strip, planning a comic book or a graphic novel, or a standalone piece of art. Planning is key. If you don't plan, then the end result is going to be something that you would think of as a first step in the process. So what I mean by that is your end result that you'd submit really is your first draft, if you will, of creating that final piece. Don't stop at that. keep on. If you have to paint the same painting over again to get what you want, I say do it. I say go ahead. Now let's look at a couple of examples of artists who work within graphic design. In graphic design, we're talking sometimes digitally here too. Graphic design can be a lot of different things. So this is an artist. His name is Christoph Niemann. Christoph Niemann is German. He's this amazing German artist. His work is just it's unbelievable. But what he's able to do within an image is truly remarkable. The stories that he can say, what he wants to convey, even not if the narrative doesn't have to be a massive storyline. It can be just a thought or convey a message. It's up to the artist. Now, Christopher Niemann does this amazing work where he will go and he'll take common items that we see. His Instagram is very popular for this. He'll bring in elements such as this is a credit card. And as you see here, there's a black line going up from the tree. The black line goes up the tree and into the card. So he's used this card, this credit card, to continue that black line. And then beside of it, he has drawn a woodsman. And he's a guy who's out lumberjack, and he's cutting a tree down. And he bends that line just a little bit, that solid shape that goes up the back of a credit card, to form that continuation of that line. This is a little interesting. It says 2 bananas that he's positioned. So look at the perspective. He's put the bananas together, and he's drawn at the end of that the body of a horse. So it looks like a horse running. More examples of this is, of course, this is what we started out with. And if you look real close with this piece, you're going to see that at the bottom, that's an actual landscape. That's cranes and people working. What he's actually done with this is a glass window overlooking this landscape. And he took a dry erase marker and he did all the elements that you see. He's drawn those cranes extending and the lines connecting. So the line from the hand of the person down to the crane does not exist. This is a small thin line that Christoph has put on there. More examples of his work is this. This is a graphic art piece. This is actually used for a cover of the New Yorker magazine. So what we interpret from this is the thumb is sticking up to form a grave, but underneath it's an okay sign. Everything's okay, right? So there's 2 different emotions going on here, 2 different elements. He does this very well. This is a bagel, and this looks like maybe poppy seeds on a bagel, and he's used this to form someone maybe shaving, with that little crease being the mouth. Here's a spoon with an egg that is actually drawn to represent a soccer player kicking the ball. Here's a bottle of ink, looking down at a bottle of ink, and then what Christoph has done is used that color of ink to draw the picture of a man taking a photograph. If you look really close, this is looking down at a book, which you have the book marker. It's drawn a cat image around that at the bottom. So those interested in maybe taking images together and photographing them, we could blow those up and print those at KVAC really easy at any size. You may be considering doing this, but planning is important. So Christoph probably drew this book out and the image he wanted underneath it before he started. You can look really close at this one. This is a brush. This is literally a paintbrush that he's pushed down on the paper to represent a dress. And then around that he's drawn a woman's figure, her hands and arms and legs, feet. It's one of my favorite ones. This is obviously a pair of socks, and he's turned that into a running T-Rex. Here's a pair of scissors. Christoph's added a piece of paper in there to cover the other portion of the scissors, but it represents a pair of legs now. So you could do anything with images to convey things, and that's what makes art so fun and amazing. I brought something that might help to understand graphic art This is a planning of a logo for a band that I'm doing. I hope you can hear that and all the paper crackling. This is a logo for a band. Now, they sent me some direction. The first thing that they sent me was this image of some mountains. This is not my drawing. This is a drawing that was sent to me in stars. Then what I don't have with me is the second image they sent, which incorporated trees and roots, and they said they wanted something similar to that. So let me peel this off and I'll show you what we came up with first. So this is the one of the final versions. Now look, notice the red. That's my marking on top of the final drawing. So I went and made marks on top of that to see corrections that I'd like to see. But this is just a rough sketch that the logo started out as. And then from here, I went ahead and redrew it again. As I said, planning is everything. And incorporated those pieces together once again, but this time with the changes that I've made. This could be a t-shirt for the band. And this is still not the final drawing or graphic design. That I marked out things, I've made notes. So now I'm going to take this and do a computer rendering. So the trees will all match up. There'll be more of a consistent curve, things like that. The lettering will be much more professional. But this is just a storyboard, if you will, a mock-up of what it is that I'm trying to do. Okay? So those of you that are working in this course, planning is key. Mock-up storyboarding is so important. We're going to take a look a little bit here at some digital planning. So let's say you were wanting to work digitally. Okay? Some of you are, and that's perfectly fine to work digitally. If you are going to work digitally, then I think it's probably a good idea for you to choose software that you're already familiar with. Using something that you're not familiar with, you're going to have to first learn how to use that, which is going to be a little difficult. And then on top of that, you're going to have to then learn how to incorporate these things we talk about. So here I have a blank canvas, right? It's a blank canvas. And what I want to do is I want to see what it is that I'm working with here. Pull these things out. Now, planning, whenever you work with a blank canvas, is a little different than, let's say, you're working with paper. Okay, you want to have layers, and then underneath those layers, you actually start to work with your composition. You actually start to draw out the elements that will go into your final piece. So you may have elements that you like and you don't like digitally, but the best thing about working digitally is you have layers. You have these layers that you can use to start to build upon. And when you look at these layers and you start to play around with these layers, you notice that you can have different elements happening, and you can turn those elements off and on, which makes it really handy for creating your art. But if I go ahead and add a new layer, and I move that layer down so I can start to work with it, what might start to happen is my design can start to flush itself out more, but you can play around with it more. So here, let me give you an example. Let's say we have an astronaut, okay? And I'm working here. This is not a vector drawing, but a vector drawing would have different points, and inside of those points you have to work, and the vector actually is more of a solid shape than it is anything else. So let's say I put my astronaut here, and the astronaut is going to be in the forefront of my drawing. I'm going to try it out and see if it works. And let's say the astronaut is going to be collecting a sample using this machine. Okay? In the background, it's a very isolated, very not much going on in the background. Nothing there. So I want to make sure to include that in here, my background. And then in the distance, in the horizon, we can do some planets and some stars. This is my first idea, my first design, if you will. And then I can turn that layer off, and I can choose another layer. This time what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the astronaut in the background. Back here. Way back here is the astronaut this time. And they're still collecting a sample. What the story is. Maybe the sample could be that they're pulling some sort of rocks or something from the ground. Okay, so I'm drawing a little stick figure of my astronaut pulling this sample from the ground. So here's the machine they're using. It's a large machine. It's got wheels. Add that in there. So just a small little rendering, a small sketch. And in the background, of course, I'm going to put way out here in the background. I'm going to put the curvature of the planet. There's not some little bit of structures, but not much. Put some rocks. Right here, closer this time to me, I'm going to put a series of rocks. And behind those rocks, I could put an alien. And this is all if what you're wanting to say calls for it, of course. So here's my alien, right? Watching him. And let's go ahead now and go back to this one. And instead, we're going to put some rocks in the background here. I'm going to erase a little bit. There we go. And we're going to put some rocks in the background here. We'll draw the alien watching him from a distance. There's our alien. I know it doesn't look much like an alien, but like I said before, this is just a mock-up, a storyboard, so it doesn't have to be super detailed. Okay. So now, after I have these two layers drawn or sketched out, I can play around and see which one I like best. I can put the astronaut front, forward, or I can put the astronaut in the rear. I can even turn both of them on, and I can tell my composition this way. Now, this is one advantage of working digitally. You have so many different elements you can play with. You can even, if you wanted, start manipulating the picture to get a certain perspective. You can move the astronaut down more and out here. So working a little closer to us this time than before. And then we can include our alien here, watching him. But we're going to get rid of all this other stuff in the background, including the other alien in this picture. And we can play around to see, well, what if I wanted this composition now, where the astronaut is a little closer to the alien working. Still has his machine. We still have our horizon here. And we can get rid of the other horizon. What's left of it anyway. Right here. And now we have a completely new composition for our drawing. So working digitally, a lot of advantages to it. Some people love it, some people don't, but it's up to you really on what you prefer. What I suggest doing is if you don't have access to a tablet, or let's say you don't have means to work digitally, some schools offer devices to students to use or sign out. You can try that. Or you can even go as far as to look for free apps and programs that are available on smartphones and try to do that with your phone. It'll be a little challenging, but it's something that could be done. So that's it. We have our storyboard, our idea of our storyboard pretty much laid out for us now. And I hope that this has made some sense, and I hope that you are really excited about taking your story and now start to plan your story or your idea for your final piece into what your composition is going to be, your perspective, your elements, your shape, your space. All of these things matter so much. So I really appreciate your taking the time to take this course. I hope you've had fun so far. I hope that you're keeping up to par with where you need to be in terms of all the things that we're asking. Be sure and check out the assignment for this course. It's really simple. I'd like to see an image of your storyboard. So take a picture of it and upload it to the course site so we can see that you've begun work on designing whatever it is that you're working on. I'd like to see just an image of that, okay? So thanks so much, and I look forward to seeing you in Unit 2 of Section 2.